Live from the Clarity from Chaos studios, heard worldwide, it's Dave Campbell. On every episode, Dave and his guests explore, discuss, and work on solutions to some of life's biggest challenges. So, if you're ready, be prepared to be enlightened, amused, and even shocked by what you hear. And now, the real, the authentic, the one and only Dave Campbell.
Welcome, and thank you for listening to Clarity from Chaos. I'm your host, Dave Campbell. If you're new to the show and like what we are doing here, go out to my website and hit the subscribe button on my podcast. The site address is clarityfromchaos, all one word, .substack.com. Also, while you're there, go out to the About tab, and you'll be able to see who the upcoming guests in the following weeks are. On this episode of Clarity, however, we're going to discuss something of great importance and, quite frankly, is truly remarkable. So to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, I'm going to read a quote from my guest's book. True stories, especially miracles, are the best kind. They give us a reason to believe in ourselves and others, in good, and mostly the reason to believe in God. Decades of trauma, loss, abuse, and severe autism, one mom decided to give up on the experts and the suffering and believe in miracles. So she got one. The prison doors that had trapped her son for over 2 decades were opened, and through his faith and sight, she was given hers. In the ashes of life, they found out that faith in God was capable to do more than they could have imagined, more than was possible. Her son showed her how God literally is everywhere, in everything, longing to show himself to us, longing for us to believe in his presence and the power to do good, especially when the world says it's impossible. We are incredibly pleased to welcome to Clarity the author of the fabulous book, Book of Heaven, a story of hope for the outcasts, the broken, and those who have lost faith, Miss Katie Asher. Welcome to the show, Katie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It absolutely is my pleasure. So why don't we start with you giving the audience a little bit of the background, your background, and part of your journey, and then we can get into your book.
Sure thing. So I'm really just, and y'all pardon my voice, I'm recovering from a little cold, so I hope that's
No, you're
okay.
fine.
Just bear with me. My background is I'm just your average American mom, and I definitely had a very challenging childhood and lived through a great deal of trauma before I had my son. But all of those experiences are what made me, and we're all are a product of our experiences.
Right.
And so those things that I went through, those traumas, they helped shape the person that I was. And during when I was a child, I always had the attitude of and the mindset that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. So I kept believing no matter how bad things were, God was using it for good. And that was my
Yeah.
mindset. And even though the trauma got really bad, and I've certainly had periods of time where I really struggled with that belief, God kept bringing me back to himself. And then I got married. My second son was after his 8-month vaccine. He got the DTP Hib, and he was neurologically injured by his vaccine. And the second set of vaccines after that, it became even worse. And of course, I didn't know what that meant at the time,
Right.
but basically, he disappeared right in front of me. He regressed rapidly and he became completely disassociated as if, and I heard one father describe it really well, and that was, it's as if someone comes in the night and steals your child and leaves you this bewildered body. And that's what it was like. And so we lived through severe autism, and severe autism is not what you think. It's not Rain Man.
Right.
It's traumatic. Every day is living hell. There's There's no sleep, there's screaming, there's nakedness, there's eloping, there's fecal smearing, there's OCD that is absolutely drives you insane. There's chaos. There is this just weeping and destruction that is everywhere that you can't escape. Um, I could go through some of those stories, but I paint a very accurate picture of what severe autism is, because what happens is people will give you a glimpse. They'll tell you one little thing, and you come away not really understanding what it's like to live 24/7,
Right.
especially over decades.
Yeah. I was going to say
Yeah,
it's not just a 2-week period. It's,
right, right.
it's day in
And
and day out. Right.
and one of the things I do in the book is later on in the book, I let some other moms tell me how they perceive severe autism. And so you don't just hear it from my words, but you hear it from other parents who are living this same journey. And what I say to people is, you know, take a moment, put on their shoes, take a walk, see what it's like. And then after they tell their stories, I say, now what if you couldn't take those shoes off?
Right.
They're yours.
Right.
And that's what has happened to all of these families, is the tragedy of losing their child and still having to care for this bewildered body. But fortunately, God was doing something so much bigger than anything that I could imagine, because of course, we as human beings, we are blinded by what we see. That's the limit of all we think is possible,
Right.
because this is all we see. How could there be more?
Right.
And what happened with my son, I'm going to take a sip of tea.
Well, that's okay.
So, what happened with my son was a miracle. And this miracle first began when I was at absolute hopelessness and I had given up on God. No, I was actually taking a yoga certification class at the time. And in this class, we were told to give an intention. And I was rolling my eyes, like, whatever.
Right. Right. Right.
And I knew also that people don't want to hear your sad story. They really don't. They People
Yeah. And
genuinely
they
don't care.
feign interest, but
Right?
they really don't. Yeah.
They would really like for you to stop talking.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And so I had my little sentence all together that was very generic, and I spoke it. And then I couldn't help myself, but what came out of my mouth was, "Oh, and I would like bad things to stop happening." Because at that point in my life, it was a disaster. My husband was extremely abusive. He had abandoned us. He had really destroyed all of my kids. I was working 3 jobs just trying to survive. My kids, of course, all of the other 4 had their own challenges. And then I was living with severe autism.
Yeah.
He would Severe autism is like at 17, he was 17 at that point, and that means he was jumping up and down, making these giant booming noises, flapping his hands. He
Right.
would bite himself so severely, he would grind on the bones, and he has these huge calluses that from biting himself.
Uh,
He's screaming, he's putting his hands over his ears. It's just all, and this is what we're all living with. And so I said, "Oh, and I would like for bad things to stop happening." And these yoga teachers were like, "Why would you say that?" And so I was like, "Oh, no, 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 I know all about belief. You believe what you've experienced.
yeah.
That's what I've experienced. Why would I believe anything else?"
Right.
At this point, the promises of God seemed meant for other people, for sure.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I was very defensive of my doubt. It
Yeah.
was honestly, it was what I was clinging to. Like, doubt was the only thing that made sense.
Right.
And so they really challenged me that that good had just as much chance of happening as bad. And this was an insane thought to me. And so I said, no, I couldn't even believe it. And so they walked me through this exercise. And that was pretty simple, but it was extraordinary in changing my mindset. And the exercise was, look at something that you think is real, like a table or a chair. And then you ask yourself, what was that table or chair before it was a table or chair? And most people that go, "Oh, it was wood or it was plastic or metal or something like that," they go to the raw material.
Right.
But the actual answer is it was an idea. It was a thought.
Right.
And so the second question is, if no one had ever had that thought, would that chair or table exist?
Would it manifest itself? Right.
It wouldn't.
No.
It
No.
cannot do
No.
it.
No, it can't. No, because of the power and the energy around that thought. That's what drives a lot of things.
Everything,
So,
everything. And so that was an extraordinary thought to me. And so I thank you, everybody, for bearing with my voice.
oh, no, no, no. No.
So I made the choice right then to believe in a miracle. And just a few days after that, came home from, and at this point, like I'm waiting tables. I'm 30, I think I was 37 at the time, waiting tables, among my other jobs just to keep food on the table. And I came home utterly exhausted. I laid on the couch, and Houston, my autistic son, came and sat at my feet, and he was totally still, and he wasn't making any of his noises. He was completely calm. And I knew it was odd, but I was so tired, I didn't even want to acknowledge it. And then suddenly he reached over and he tugged at the blanket very intentionally, just like you would to get someone's attention.
Right.
And he said, "Mama." And I opened my eyes, and he was looking directly into my eyes, which he had never done before. He'd also never said my name before. And he said, "I love you." And I had waited 17 years for my son
Right.
to say my name and tell me that he loved me. And in that moment, I was given a choice, and I could continue to believe in what I could see only in the
Right.
disaster, the
Right.
chaos, or I could believe in the miracle. And that's what I chose to do. It was hard in the beginning because I was still so surrounded by defeat. And so it was just that one miracle that I could cling to, just that one. And then fast forward almost 5 years, and that's when my son began to come out of his shell. And the way that happened was by a letterboard. And so my son began spelling on a letterboard, and I'll show you what that looks like. It looks like the alphabet, just like that.
Okay.
And we actually started on three stencil boards, and he would hold a pencil and he would begin trying to point to one letter at a time.
Right.
And what happened is it built up motor pathways over time so that then he could begin to point to different letters
Mhm.
to communicate. And the very first thing that he ever communicated independently was an answer to the question, if you could put any slogan on a t-shirt, what would it be? And he spelled, "I'm in here."
That's amazing.
I know.
That is amazing.
He was 21.
Yeah. Oh.
So obviously I became, as he said, a beast trying to find out who he was.
Ha! Ha! Right. Trying to drag the rest of it out,
I was going to drag
huh?
it all out of him.
Oh,
And in some parts he was reticent to share things. And you have to understand, you try to imagine if you had been locked in your body for 21 years
right.
and never had the opportunity to engage in conversation and discourse and test how what you said would be reacted to. You might not throw everything out at once. You might
Right.
just give a little bit at a time.
Right.
Plus, he's still dealing with a very challenging body and a motor complexity that is just baffling. So once I finally start getting to know him and he starts sharing more, I basically find out that he's totally and completely brilliant, and everything the experts had told me was wrong. Everything. Like they were 100% wrong about severe autism. They are literally completely wrong.
Well, that doesn't surprise me at all, Katie, because I think the first move is to medicate. Um, I heard of somebody the other day being medicated, and it was the first move, and Of course, I don't know if there was any other effort to look into what was going on, whether it was environmental, whether it was situational, and
Right.
any of the other components that would, but it's just immediate, medicate, 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 medicate. And
They really don't have another answer. I mean,
well, that's
you know,
yeah, but they
yeah.
don't. They don't have another answer, and they haven't spent, well, maybe some have, a lot of time other than coming up with a drug that will do the work for them. And it's, half
Well, what's baffling to me though is they're not actually treating the
right,
problem, they're treating a symptom. So they're
right.
finding a drug for a symptom, not recognizing what the actual problem is. You know, like one of the things that Houston used to do when he was a baby is push his head on the ground. And that was just one of the things. Well, I didn't understand it until later when he began to explain what was going on with his body, that was actually the sign of him not being able to feel where his body was. So it was a broken vestibular system. And that what
Okay.
for people that don't know, that's basically like your body's GPS. It's actually the first part of your neurology that ever gets formed is your vestibular and then your proprioceptive system.
Okay.
Those are literally the groundwork to so for example, you can't navigate anything, any vessel, if the vessel doesn't know where it's at.
Right. Yeah.
So you have to form those first. Those are just
Okay.
fundamental. So as he began sharing everything and he's like spelling out the Declaration of Independence and I'm like, "Where's all this coming from?"
Wow.
And one day I'm like, "I don't understand how you know all this information. Do you just have like really good hearing?" Boy, was I not prepared for the answer.
So what was what was
The
the answer?
answer was, "I'm special." And I'm like, "Of course you are," right? Like a mom, you know? And he says, "I can hear thoughts." Right. So I did what anyone else who heard that statement would respond with, which is
Right.
doubt.
Sure.
And I said, "Are you lying?" Which was so offensive. But he said, "You don't get the kind of gifts that I have if you lie." And so then I began testing him over and over and over again. Not only did he get all of the test right, but then I started asking him questions without speaking. And he started spelling out the answer without me ever speaking the question.
Oh,
So then that night, I'm like absolutely blown away and I'm just overwhelmed with all of these thoughts. And I suddenly realized, oh my goodness, my yoga teachers were right. Thought is a thing, like it's energy.
yeah. Now it manifests itself. It
Yeah,
absolutely does. Um, I'm a absolute firm believer in, you know, it starts with a thought, then goes into words, and then it goes into action.
that's it.
But
Yes.
but
Yes.
it doesn't manifest itself without thought. And people don't understand, I don't think, and that'll be my next question to you, the energy
Yes.
that is generated around that process, that thought, and what it triggers universally.
Mhm. So I'll
So,
unpack it a little bit just to give people,
okay.
I don't want to overwhelm people with science. I've been accused of doing that, but I got so excited. I had to know everything. So,
No, no, no.
but basically, thought is energy. So that
Mhm.
means that it behaves by the laws of energy. And the very first law of energy is the law of conservation, which says that energy is neither created or destroyed, it's only transferred.
Right.
So we think our thoughts are just like in our head, and that's just where they're staying. And what we don't realize is they're actually going out and doing
Yes,
exactly what we're thinking. And we've
exactly.
all had this experience like where you think about somebody and then they call you or they text you, or you think about somebody and then they show up, or you feel somebody looking at you and you turn around and they're looking at you. And it's because that thought is actually transmitting energy. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do.
And the interesting thing about that, Katie, is people can understand, I guess, if you talk about prayer because it forms the same way. And you collectively have, for example, an entire country saying the same prayer, that energy, what that creates, right?
Yes.
So people will understand and people can walk away with at least a little bit of an understanding is prayer does that. Prayer initiates that thought, gives that thought the energy, the vibration to go forward and
Well, you landed on the most perfect subject because when Houston began describing everything that he was experiencing,
right,
what it basically is because the vaccine injury basically demyelinated his motor, it left him with a brain body disconnect. He was not, because motor is what attaches us to our body. That's really like the fundamental, that's what helps us operate our body, is all these motor pathways. So when those were demyelinated and new ones weren't able to be formed because of the inflammation, he was essentially not able to develop neurologic motor development into the body, and instead was developing into his etheric, his spiritual body. So he became more and more attached to his etheric body. And that disattachment or detachment, it enabled him to see and experience the whole metaphysical realm.
yeah,
And what he described, describes prayer. And he said that was his first discovery, that he learned that thought was different from prayer. He said, because thoughts just float away, they float off. He
right.
said, but whenever he would pray, he could feel a lift,
It
just
focuses. Yeah,
because it's intent, and the
right.
intent is God.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah. So, but he can see, I mean, it's incredible. He can see angels, demons. He's seen heaven. He started describing things in heaven that he had never read, very specifically, very like details. And he was describing them in a way as someone who has experienced it, not quoting.
Right. It's interesting. I think part of my research, I came across the telepathy tapes that I think is starting to push towards the heart brain piece and people starting to understand now the neural pathways in the heart. And
Yes.
then you start thinking about the soul, where everybody's been concerned about the gray matter between their ears. Well, that's only half of it, right? There's another whole component that comes in there,
Well,
you know,
when you're dead, right? When your
right,
body's not living anymore, let's go back to that subject of energy.
right,
Where is the energy that was moving that body?
right.
It's spirit.
Yeah,
We are a soul with a body, not a body with a soul.
right. Yeah. And I people just miss it, Katie. They miss the fact that they're just walking around as a carbon unit, and that's really all they are, is a carbon unit. But what makes them special is the soul component to the
Yeah.
carbon unit, right? And the soul doesn't go anywhere. It's there, stays there. It drives everything. And people don't want to acknowledge it or whatever, but it's remarkable that it sounds like your son has the ability to go into the Akashic records, for example.
Well, it's basically all everywhere.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, God is everywhere.
Right.
He's so to him, it's not the Akashic records. It's God. It's God's will. It's God. He's everywhere.
Right.
He's everything. And when you understand that no matter can exist absent of spirit, it literally, no matter can exist without spirit,
Yeah.
then can understand that he's everywhere. He's everything. All it says in scripture in the beginning, I'm so sorry.
Take some tea. Take some
Sorry.
tea.
But that he was in the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God. All things were made through him. Without him, nothing exists that is.
Yeah. I have to ask, where was the church? Or your church, your religion, whatever. I don't even want to get into that, but where were they at with all of this? Because one of my complaints, Katie, is they've taken such a back seat and continue to take a back seat on all of this, or a lot of it anyway. And I was just curious where they were at with this.
I would say that during those 21 years where my son didn't have a voice, they didn't care
Yeah,
at all. And to the point where I left the church because it was very apparent how we were not wanted.
right.
And you'll find that most families with severe disabilities in their family do not attend church. And when they do, there's like a classroom that's separated, excluded,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
included.
for the disabled or whatever.
Yeah.
They're not
And
main
it's
they're not mainstreamed, right?
they're
They're
not
not right,
they're not included, they're not
right.
treated as an equal. The the judgment is based on their bodies that they have no comprehension and therefore to treat them like infants.
Yeah,
And yet here my son was doing integrals and calculus, even though he'd only been taught single addition, you know, that
yeah,
so their perception is based on behavior. And when you don't have motor control, you can't control your behavior. So the perception is false. It's based on a false assumption.
yeah,
And more importantly, Jesus is adamant about us caring for the least, for the weak. It says,
right,
if you want to love me, this is how to do it.
right. Yep.
And they've specifically chosen not.
Yeah, and
So, yeah.
I don't wanna go into the politics of it. I was just
Oh,
curious.
yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious because my sense was exactly what you said. I mean, I see it in my own church. They're not out of their way to do things like that. It's more about the corporate church than it is actually about what's written in the pages of the Bible and the religion and the spirituality of what's there. I mean, they'll quote it night and day,
Yeah.
but they
Well,
don't
I think,
do it. I guess.
yeah, I think what happened, because I think your other question about the church is really like, how are they embracing all of this recognition of the spiritual and the spiritual
Exactly.
existence all around us? And that's a very important question.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the answer is I think it terrifies them, and so they are ignoring it.
Yeah. Yeah. I would think that a miracle of this magnitude and the abilities that your son has would terrify people that didn't have an open mind to what was going on. And the simple fact, Katie, that God reached down and touched your son and granted him the abilities and that he has, you know, and gave you a lot in
Yes,
all of this as well,
the
right?
hope, the hope that he's given me is extraordinary. But you know what? The reality is God said he was going to do this in the word of God. He said it.
Yeah,
In Luke 14 at the great banquet, he said, "Go out and get the disabled, get the blind, get the lame, he said, bring them in." And everybody else had other important things to do. And so he said, "They'll appreciate me. I'll reveal myself to them." And
right,
then in First Corinthians he says, "For God has chosen the weak to shame the strong, and the foolish to shame the
right.
wise."
Yeah, it's just amazing, and my assumption is he continues to grow every day. You know, I can't imagine the glow of energy that comes out of your son at this point. Just, the
It's
is
fairly extraordinary.
yeah, I would think so. I
And
would
he
think so.
understands, he says that Christ told him that he would be his herald. And he has this wonderful story in the book where he talks about when Christ came to him and he was a child, and he talked about the white filling the room. It was whiter, like just white upon white. And then seeing him and how nothing can explain to you what that's like. And and seeing the holes in his hands. And then Christ saying, that sword at my side, that's the word of truth, and that you will use it. And that, I mean, it was literally just weeping as I'm watching my son spell this out to me.
Right.
And his whole goal is to get other non speakers now to be bold enough to share what they know.
Yeah.
And it was so exciting. I saw like recently somebody posted, my husband's going to go talk to our church about our son and these abilities. Can anyone tell me what your kids have said? What are the experiences? What are they saying?
Right.
And I'm literally, y'all, I'm so lucky. I'm so blessed because I got to sit there and look at this list of all these different kids' testimonies about
Right.
Christ and about heaven. One of the little girls, her mom asked her, who do you want to advocate for? And she wrote Jesus. Another one is having, because they have a lot of visual issues because encephalopathy causes massive ocular motor dysfunction.
Huh?
So he wanted the whole Bible. He wants to, listen to the whole Bible. And he said, I'm doing this so that I can tell the whole world about Christ. And I'm like, they are. And then another one said, he kept spelling, this was at the very beginning of him spelling. And he kept saying, I have friends. I have friends. And of course, his parents know his life and he doesn't have friends.
Right.
And they're like, who? And he spelled C, but painfully sat there, and it took him quite a while, but painfully spelled out Christ. And people do not even understand the magnitude of what this is, that God did not use the powerful. God went to the people that everyone pities.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to start crying, Katie. So where do people find your book? I would assume on Amazon.
Yes, always.
Yeah.
But
Barnes and
for those
Noble.
who, and it's
Huh?
not at Barnes and Noble yet.
Okay.
So for those who don't want to buy from Amazon, and I know that I get that a lot, where can I buy it? Not on Amazon. If
Right.
you go to asher.house.hope and send me an email, then I can send you a copy and we can actually sign it too. So there's that.
Okay. And again, what was that? Asher dot
Asher
house. Asher dot house dot hope
at Gmail.
at Gmail. Great. Great, great, great. We've got to keep this connection going because I I want to be part of the process, the
Yeah.
as this goes, because it's just remarkable, Katie. Ladies and gentlemen, for if you just, popped in, we're talking to Miss Katie Asher, who's written a book about her son, severe autism, and it's called The Book of Heaven, a story for the outcasts, the broken, and those who have lost faith. And it is a chronology of how her son interacts with God, which I think quite frankly, there are ministers in this country that would give their left hand to be
Yeah.
able to have the insight that your son has because of his firsthand discussions with the Almighty. It's just,
What is so important to Houston is faith.
yeah,
And he constantly tells everyone that core beliefs are the most important, that we have to believe him. We have to take God exactly at his word.
yeah,
And we don't do that. We
no.
create doctrines that limit him,
Yeah,
that tell people to,
we parse around what works for us, what doesn't work for us, so that we can get by. It's not, yeah, we just marginalize the living crap out of the Bible than actually looking at it like it is the absolute foundational component to everything. It
yes,
is the basis, it's the rock of everything.
yes,
And people, like I said, people want to marginalize it. Different denominations do different things, and you have to sit there and scratch your head going, wait a minute. If I read the Bible, it says this, and this. How in the world did you get to that? And all I can say is that they've marginalized it to suit their own business.
Well,
And that's unfortunate.
I think that, not to this isn't I don't wanna necessarily put fault on where they ended up because I see how it happened. So what happened was it was really I mean, it certainly it's what they call materialism or humanism. And it started around 500, 700 AD, and you could definitely look back even further at the Sadducees and things like that to see evidence of it. But really, it's this idea that there's nothing more and that what we see
Is it?
is is it.
Right.
And so what had happened is that had actually started going through all the intellectual circles through the centuries. And then it started influencing the church. And so there was whenever and this it did actually influence, it had an influence in the Reformation as well, which, I mean, there did need to be reforms, there really did. But what happened was they threw out everything that was spiritual until they basically had this very sterile doctrine that made everything they didn't understand symbolic.
Mhm.
And so then it wasn't based on belief anymore. It was based on reason. And then you have the age of reason and the enlightenment, which basically I call it the enlightenment, which it took everything and said man's reason is the limit of truth. And I want everybody to understand what our reason is based on. Our reason is based on our observations. And then we think through, we process through what we observe to draw conclusions. But what people don't understand is that our sensory system, the normal neurological sensory system, is only capable of observing 4% of the energy.
Yep.
So what we're saying is 4% is the limit of truth. That's what so a lot
Exactly.
of these denominations and the different choices to do different things and how came from this ripping all the spirituality away, understanding that all matter comes from spirit, and taking all those elements of spirit out of worship. And then you're left with a very knowledge based enterprise.
Well, see
That,
that because they can define it,
Mhm.
right? They can define that. Trying to define what your son has, they can't define. And because they can't wrap their heads around the fact of thought being energy and vibration and it's limitless. It just, they can't wrap their heads around that. So they move it aside, right? And they only deal with the little component that they can define.
you
So,
know what I thought was really interesting was the first people to interview me was Messianic Jewish organization called First Fruits of Zion. And I'm so glad that they reached out to me because they were able to explain many things that are actually part of the Jewish understanding of spirit and matter that was always part of Jewish culture and understanding that has been lost to the church.
yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I would agree completely. Well, it has been an absolute delight on my part, and I know my audience is going to love it. I don't know quite what else to say, Katie. It's been incredible. Thank
Well,
you.
I would like to tell everyone that whenever you're reading the book, the miracle starts about halfway through. And before that, you basically get to this place of how much more can she possibly go through?
Right.
And what I want you to know is that no matter what you're going through, no matter how awful it is, that is not the limit of what God is capable of using to create good. He can do anything. All things are possible for those who believe.
Right. Again, we've been talking to Miss Katie Asher, who's written a marvelous book, The Book of Heaven. Um, and I would encourage everybody to go out and get a copy of it. Again, the website is asher.house.
Yes, not anything Asher.house. I know. I couldn't believe that was an option. So, yes. Yeah. Oh, and no, I mean, sorry. The website is Asher.house and
Okay,
the email,
asher.house. Okay.
mhm, and the
Okay.
email is Asher.house.hope. at
Yeah, there
gmail.com.
there we go. There we go.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's been terrific, and we'll stay in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to listen to more Clarity from Chaos shows on demand, go to clarityfromchaos.buzzsprout.com or send Dave an email at info@clarityfromchaos.com for information on previous shows. You can also listen to the show on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Twitter, or Google Podcast. Until next time, please remember, it's not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. Be well, everyone.